Hello there, this is the second part to the Lesson 3.04 video Confronting the Crisis. And we were in the midst of reading the lesson for today, and we left off on page 694, and we have to read to 695. So here we go. Wizard in the White House, referring of course to FDR, and here's a picture during one of his informal fireside chats. Before I begin, let's read the excerpt. 3 weeks before history without Roosevelt. 3 weeks before Franklin Roosevelt's inauguration as president, an assassin's bullet barely missed him in Miami. If FDR had died that day and his running mate John Nance Garner of Texas had become president, would there have been a New Deal? Some historians believe that the economic crisis of 1933 was so severe that any new president would have been forced to enact dramatic reforms. Others believe that without Roosevelt's dynamic personality, there would have been no bold New Deal, but only more cautious Hoover-style efforts that would have led to further economic decline, perhaps even a revolutionary movement like the ones that took down democratic governments in Europe and South America. So who's to know? One of those questions that we always have in history. What if something happened? What history would have taken place if something else would have happened? Okay, so starting with Wizard in the White House. Early in the 100 Days, a Washington veteran who had worked with Roosevelt since World War I ran into a colleague outside the president's office. "That fellow in there is not the fellow we used to know," he remarked. "There's been a miracle here." Much of the country felt the same way. Roosevelt was turning out to be an extraordinary leader. Day by day, he tackled new problems and started new programs. He was building a more powerful presidency and a much larger federal government. Roosevelt's willingness to use federal government power to help farmers and workers represented a sharp break with America's laissez-faire tradition. Laissez-faire, remember, means leave it alone. Still, he claimed not to have a clearly worked out system of ideas about how society should be organized. When asked about his philosophy, he replied, "Philosophy? I'm a Christian and a Democrat, that's all." FDR is more like a brilliant commander on a battlefield, thinking up tactics as the fighting surged around him. He likens himself to a quarterback who can only call the next play after he sees how the last one turned out. In part, FDR worked his will by exerting enormous charm. Even his enemies found it hard not to like him. He also brought in a very capable aides, and he mastered volumes of information. Unable to move around on his own, he soaked up data from his assistants, including his remarkable wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, who traveled the country as FDR's eyes and ears. The president was also a wizard at shaping public opinion. He held twice-weekly press conferences in his private office. He enjoyed talking with journalists and gave reporters a behind-the-scenes glimpse at the White House. They responded with mostly sympathetic coverage and followed an unspoken rule not to write stories about the president's disability or take pictures of him in his wheelchair. Consequently, few Americans knew that their president was paralyzed. FDR proved even more adept at directly addressing the public. Thanks to his mastery of the new medium of radio, Roosevelt became a familiar friend and helper to millions of families. His radio speeches, called fireside chats, were not formal addresses, but what one Chicagoan called good plain talk. They eased people's fears about the economic crisis and built a strong bond between Roosevelt and the public. After one fireside chat, a Californian wrote to FDR, "It made me feel as though you were really one of us." And fireside chats, referring to a kind of a cozy feeling. You're sitting around your fireplace, by your radio, and you're just having a chat with somebody, having an informal talk. And that's what Roosevelt was trying to do, just really trying to make the public comfortable and feel at ease, because that's part of the panic of the Great Depression, is that everybody's very uncertain and there's a lot of panicking. He's trying to ease their fears and calm people down so they don't do drastic things. Creating a New Deal coalition. Okay, yes, we'll read to that and stop there at the end of that heading. Okay. FDR was first elected in 1932. Traditionally, the presidential party that wins the presidency loses seats in the congressional election 2 years later. But in 1934, Democrats picked up 9 new seats in the U.S. Senate and another 9 in the House of Representatives. By electing Democrats, voters showed confidence in the new president and approval of his New Deal programs. The 1934 election also signaled a political realignment that favored the Democrats, and continued to do so until long after Roosevelt's time. Since the Civil War, the Republican Party had drawn its main support from smaller cities and small towns, farming regions outside the South and the West. Democrats, in contrast, found their greatest support among Catholic immigrants in big cities, especially in the populous Northeast, and among Southerners in the former Confederate states. Together, these groups made up a minority of the American electorate. By 1932 and 1936, however, new groups turned their support toward the Democrats. The Democratic Party's New Deal coalition included many immigrants, many of them Catholics and Jews who had not become citizens until the 1920s or later. It included women, especially the foreign-born, who had been slow to exercise their new right to vote. It included young voters who came of age in the Great Depression. While most Southern blacks were denied the right to vote, African Americans who had moved north in the Great Migration now deserted the party of Lincoln in large numbers. They too preferred Franklin Roosevelt. Many farmers, grateful for New Deal help, also turned to FDR and the Democrats. These voting groups, united by economic hardship and affection for Roosevelt, gave the Democrat powerful majorities in Congress and in state governments. Later, as the Depression eased, cracks in the coalition would appear as regional, ethnic, and religious antagonisms again asserted themselves. Okay, and we'll stop here. And we'll continue back to the online lesson. So you should have completed your reading guide. Make sure you check your answers with the lesson answer key. And now let's go on to the confidence and style. Just how did Franklin Roosevelt have such a lasting impact on a grateful nation? And why were people willing to listen and wait? See for yourself. Listen to excerpts from the Roosevelt Fireside Chats. Then visit the History Matters website to analyze what the listeners had to say about Roosevelt's speech. As you read the letters, complete the letters to Franklin Roosevelt's sheet, which you'll find in the lesson resources. Okay, so let's look at a fireside chats here.
I want to talk for a few minutes with the people of the United States about banking. To talk with the comparatively few who understand the mechanics of banking, but more particularly with the overwhelming majority of you who use banks for the making of deposits and the drawing of checks. I want to tell you what has been done in the last few days and why it was done.
Okay, so that was just a short excerpt from the Fireside Chat. And then if you look at the History Matters website, it is just the public response to FDR's first Fireside Chat. And it'll be letters that people have written to the president and the reactions to the first Fireside Chat. And I'm just skimming through, and you can see that mostly the letters are very positive for the most part. And then the questions on the Fireside Chat sheet that you found in the lesson resources, go along with the best you can and check your answers on the lesson answer key there as well. Okay, and then when you're done, be sure to click into the 3.04 checkpoint, and there will be 2 questions that would be over information you can find in your reading guide. So good luck and do well on your 304 checkpoint. Goodbye.